When will we see a new Xbox Series console? Now, there's nothing definitive, but Phil has mentioned that there's nothing on the immediate roadmap. But let's take some guesses of when we think we may see another Xbox Series console. Hey, I'm Sam with Busy Dad Gaming. I help busy dads with all things Xbox so they can relax and go back to their families recharged. Now, do you remember when the Xbox Series console was announced? I definitely remember, and I'm seeing that announcement trailer go through, and I just imagine myself hitting F5 a billion times across umpteen tabs just so I could get my pre-order through the door. So what actually happened? Yeah, pretty much that. Took some time off from work and then went through and hit F5 a billion times across umpteen tabs until I finally got Walmart to take my pre-order, and thank God Walmart didn't actually cancel my pre-order. Now the Series X is still really difficult to get, and the Series S is a lot easier to get, but with the Xbox One generation now being completely over, they're no longer manufacturing those consoles, we're left with just the Series X, the S, and then potentially used hardware if you can get your hands on it at a decent price. So that really does beg the question, when do we expect to see another Xbox Series console or even a revision, especially since Phil has mentioned that there is nothing on the immediate roadmap. Now, before we hypothesize when we may expect another Series console to come out, let's take a look at Xbox's history to give us a little better insight of what we can potentially expect. So first up, we have the 360. So the original came out in 2005, and there were two major revisions to this console for obvious reasons. The 360 Slim did come out in 2010. It still had some issues. You still had the Red Ring of Death issue coming out, but then you had the 360e. That one did eventually get rid of a lot of those initial issues from the 360 and really did end up kind of looking like an Xbox One, but that did come out in 2013. So over the course of 8 years from 2005 to 2013, you had two major revisions on the 360. Now, when we look at the Xbox One, the original came out in 2013, and we all know how that announcement went. And then you had the One S in 2016, which came out with both a digital and a physical version, and then you had the One X or the Scorpio edition that came out in 2017. So you're starting to see some similarities here between the 360 and the Xbox One era, but what this does look at from a very high level is that when it looks at hardware revisions or refreshes, there's usually a reason for that, and it comes down to things like manufacturing costs decreasing. You also have technological improvements and just overall efficiencies. It is cheaper to produce that particular piece of equipment, so they can potentially do more with less. Which brings us to some of the rumors that we're hearing that some kind of hardware refresh is going to be coming out here in 2022 or 2023, and I'll link those sources in the description below, but I'm going to disagree with them on a couple main points of why I don't feel that we're going to see a hardware revision anytime soon. So the first major reason is just the overall market conditions of what we're looking at today. And because supply is so heavily constrained, it's still really hard to get a Series X right now. And you're looking at that overall supply chain is just very taxed right now. And then when you look at the raw material costs, because it does cost more to get a lot of those components compared to when the Series X originally came out. So right now it's actually costing more to produce a Series X than it did when it originally launched. Now the second major reason that I don't think that we're going to see a hardware revision anytime soon is when you look at Xbox's history, around the 3-year mark is when we would see some of those initial revisions start to hit. Now, again, with the 360 and the Xbox One, we saw revisions around the 3-year mark. And if we're looking at a 3-year mark here for this series console generation, we're looking at around 2023 and into 2024. Now, again, because of supply and the overall market conditions, analysts are saying that we won't see a lot of the supply constraints start to ease up until 2023. So when we're looking at this from a very high level, you're starting to see that the Series X and most often the Series S is still going to be running into some of those supply chain issues, which means that by 2024, it's still going to be relatively difficult to do a revision because you're not getting some of those efficiencies that you would normally get. You're not getting some of those technological improvements, and so you're not doing more with less. Now, coming at this from a dad's perspective, when do I actually expect a refresh to happen? Now, I would bet on a Series S refresh coming in the latter half of 2024 if I was a betting man. Again, because I just don't see the overall supply chain catching up with where things are at today, and I don't see a lot of efficiencies being gained within that particular time frame. So if we're looking at the 3-year mark, 2023 is coming up on the 3 years when these things originally launched. I just don't see that happening. So 2024 is going to be the most likely when we'll see some kind of initial refresh. Now, when we look at a Series S, specifically when we're looking at a refresh, I don't expect any kind of disk drive because, again, we haven't hit those efficiency gains yet to warrant a $100 extra piece of equipment to go into a $300 console. I don't see that happening. Now, I do foresee a lot of these flash memories coming down in price. So we may end up seeing a 1 terabyte option coming a little further down the road, and potentially some spec bumps where we see some voltage increases to the CPU and the GPU to pull a little extra power out of that Series S. But when it comes to the Series X, I don't expect that thing to be refreshed for quite some time. You're talking like 2026, maybe even 2027 if we're going off of some historical accuracies here. But ultimately, I don't see any kind of hardware refreshes coming in the next few years. Now, if you're like many where you're struggling to get a Series X today, make sure to check out my video on how I went through the process of getting a Series X, and I'll see you over there.